Welcome to part 4 in our discussion about the 10 foundational concepts and beliefs that dictate how we parent. This series is about the clash of power and control between parents and their children, one of the most challenging dynamics of parenting. In the last video, I introduced you to power, agency, and control. I also shared the Venn diagram and how the synergistic interaction activates the individual's potential, what we call the motivational center. Today, we go deeper into the Venn diagram and we explore awareness of power and permission to use power. We dig into two aspects of agency, feeling of agency and judgment of agency. And finally, how these impact our sense of control, the doing of all things. This will help point out the major pitfalls of the classic parenting model of control, correction, and consequences, what Adam Price calls the paradoxical response. This evidence that we're looking at points us blatantly to the need to shift to an attachment-based approach that activates the motivational center in our young adult children. And all of this brings up the question, who owns power and control? Now, as I review the definitions that I shared last video, I encourage you to pause a moment and get pen and paper, write these three concepts down. The first one, power, is about resources and potential. Agency, the second one, is about options and choices. And finally, the third one, control, is about action. It's about the process of things. The synergistic interaction is expressed as, I feel in control of my own life. I can act, I can do what's in my mind. As we get going today, let's take a moment to talk about power. Again, power is about resources and potential. In many ways, it's easier to see the external resources, like, for example, an asset that we have, a job, property, vehicle, friendship. Those are resources. That gives us power. Personal resources are sometimes easy to see as well, like physical strength, muscles, example, height, our own senses, the input from the things that we sense around us. In the discussion of motivation, internal resources play a really important role. Intellectual capacity has received a lot of attention in the years past. And then it comes along emotional intelligence. And of course, that really important dimension of development called executive function. Things like focused attention or abstract thinking and planning and organizing. There are other internal resources like tenacity, strong connections with ourself, character traits such as confidence, resilience, self-regulation, and for parents, the ability to influence. On a neurophysiological level, we think about maturity. How mature is our nervous system? How well developed and how efficient are the neural structures? Even for us as adults, 30, 50, maybe even 80 years old. Power is about potential. No power, no resources, no potential. The saying, I would if I could, is really a statement of power. Having power itself, though, is not enough. We also need two additional aspects to go along with that power. We need awareness and we need permission. If we're unaware that we have a resource, we are in essence living without it. Whatever potential that resource represents is not going to be acted on. Along with awareness, we must have permission to access and use the resource. And parents play a vital role in helping their children become aware and giving them permission to use that power. Without the permission, without the awareness, we are left feeling powerless and in many cases unmotivated. But the opposite is true, of course. Awareness of and permission to use empowers us. When parents claim power over the child, they disempower them. Since we want motivated children, it's probably a good idea to help them become aware and give them permission to use their power. Awareness and permission to use our power activate agency. This is the next part in the equation towards the motivational center. Having a resource leads us to say, now I have options. We are now able to see the choices that we have available. Keep in mind that this all occurs as a seamless process. We aren't aware of shifting into options and choices. We don't blatantly think, okay, now I have agency. It's a subtle and automatic process. It's like walking up the stairs. When you take the first step, you don't stop and say, okay, now that I've taken the first step, I can take the next step. That's just not how our mind works. We automatically move on. And so power leads to agency, like step one leads to step two. And agency, like power, is a multi-layered concept. The first layers we talked about earlier, the definitions, the core definitions, options and choices. The next layer in our understanding of agency has two parts as well. What we refer to in the research as feeling of agency and judgment of agency. These are similar to the awareness and permission that we discussed regarding power and resources. The first one, feeling of agency, is the deep down sense or feeling, I have options. This is what we are referring to as bottom up feeling. It's actually rooted in the gut, rooted in our torso. This feeling in charge of our own life and destiny is powerful. When we feel the statement, I have options, this feeling is often like a smile in our body and a sense of excitement and anticipation. On the other hand, the feeling of no options is deflating. It's full of tension, often holding our breath, feeling stuck or feeling frozen. And this is what parents often feel when they've tried everything that they know, but the problem persists or their child is in resistance. This leaves us feeling optionless, feeling a lack of agency. The second part of this, the judgment of agency, is more cognitive. Our judgment is about the beliefs, it's about the options that we have available on a cognitive level. Judgment of agency is more a cool assessment. It's based on our perception of the power we have and then our beliefs, often what we have been taught. For example, what we believe parents are supposed to do, how they're supposed to behave. Responsibilities, for example. This is the options that we think we have. For example, judgment of agency is any statement that identifies the belief behind action. Because I'm the parent, because, inferred or stated, is the expression of the belief that being the parent is all it takes. Being the parent equals I'm the one with options and choices. Or the statement like, why can't you just do what you're told? It indirectly expresses our belief that we are the ones with the options. Now, an alternative would be, oh my, what are you going to do now? When we express this to the child, the idea, in my judgment, you are the one with the options becomes pretty clear. Most parents struggle to believe this, and the human culture certainly doesn't support this idea that it's the child that has options. Now, this whole thing can get really complicated when we're working with deficits in one or more of these basic resources and abilities. Like, for example, learning disabilities or ADHD or executive function deficits. When our children face these challenges, this whole options and choices becomes more challenging. Parenting a child with one or more of these deficits requires us to have clearer and more developed sense of power and agency ourselves. If, due to our own limited neurodevelopment, we have a deficit in an executive skill, or maybe we have some form of ADHD, difficulty believing in ourselves, maybe even, this can make parenting very difficult. And in these situations, we are more likely to try to control our children. This leads to feeling less power, and the feeling of agency goes into the red. And all of this, again, highlights the question, who owns power and control? Now we move into the biggie, control. This is where power and agency play out. Now we're in action. Again, our example of climbing the stairs is relevant. Just like we automatically move from step 2 to step 3, and then from step 3 to step 4 without a pause, power to agency, agency to control, we move into action. It's automatic, it's virtually unstoppable. We don't have to motivate our children and others. We actually just need to stop disempowering them. Now, keep in mind that this is not a linear process, but it's actually rather fluid, kind of like playing ping pong. The ball goes back and forth. Even before it comes across the net, we are evaluating how it will come, identifying resources, identifying options in a split second, thinking strategy and preparing to act. As the ball, life, and interactions come at us, we already have a sense of our skills, the power. In the background, we're instantly sorting through our options, agency, deciding how to respond, agency into anticipation of control. As it hits the table on our side, decisions are made, beginning of control. We are already acting, taking control of the game. We even say, I took control of the situation. Control is the action in life, the actual doing of things. Back and forth, the fluid flow, the dance of power, agency, and control. Now, when we pause and we look a bit deeper into the definition of control and the etymology of the word, tracking from its original meaning to its current use, it was originally an accounting term that referred to a person with a ledger. The ledger was used to evaluate the accuracy of an account. It was about the standard or the benchmark. The one that did this was the controller or the regulator, not to be confused with someone that has control issues. This was actually a bona fide position and function. The current use of the word control is probably best understood by contrasting the noun form versus the verb form. Noun, regulator, supervisor, manager, authority, the one with jurisdiction. The verb form is to manage, to regulate, to evaluate against the benchmark or expectations, and even, surprisingly, to instruct and influence. That was surprising to me to find those words in the synonym list. As we break the definition down, two aspects emerge. One is primary. It is about doing, getting things done. It includes regulating and managing, especially managing oneself. The other is secondary. It's about guidance, instruction, and influence, or to sway. The second one will become very important in an upcoming video on parental authority. So we're going to hold that one off to the side for a moment. But for today, the key question continues to surface. Who owns power and control? At first, in the context of parenting, it seems that the parent owns power and control. It's true. Parents do have benchmarks. We do have standards and expectations, and that is legitimate. In fact, children are expected to be under control. Parents are expected to have authority over, to govern, to manage, to direct, and even if necessary, to demand and even command. And so the question, who owns power and control over an individual, is not always easy. It gets kind of fuzzy. In our context of parenting, we might even rephrase the question. Who owns control over the child? Who owns the child's power and agency and control? Today, we started with the review of our basic definitions. Power is about resources and potential. Agency is about options and choices. And control is about action and process. This is expressed as I'm in control of my own life. I can act. I can do what's in my own mind. And going deeper into power, I highlighted the need for awareness of and also the permission to use our power. I shared two additional aspects that show up in the research around agency, what is called feeling of agency and judgment of agency. From this, we can see that we must both know on a cognitive level and know in our own gut, the physical sensing level, that we have options. When these two levels of knowing are in alignment, options and choices become clear. Decision making is much easier, and we automatically move into action. The final part of the motivational center is control. And as I said in video 3, if we want motivated children, we need to embrace our children's right to be aware of and to utilize these attributes. When we look at the developmental level, which, by the way, is programmed into the fabric of how we grow and develop, and when we understand the underlying dynamics of what I'm calling the motivational center, the answer to this big question of today is very clear. Each individual owns their own control. Now, I realize this points to another question. What about parental authority? And even another one. How am I supposed to keep my children safe if they have control over their own life? These, in fact, are the subjects that we now shift to in the next video in this series. But for today, it's important for us to understand the evidence is clear. Each person owns their own control.